In the Colombian rainforest, back in October 1904, I arrived to look into what seemed like an ordinary drowning case. Instead, I uncovered a killing ground that had been in use for more than 2 centuries. Prints that shifted from human shape to animal. Every witness spoke of the same impossible figure. Inside a cave shrine, I found piles of bones, each one etched with a name. The locals knew her as Patasola, the one-legged woman of Colombian legend. I possess her skull, the photographs, and the rifle that ultimately brought her down. This is the real story of how we pursued and destroyed a myth. Welcome to the Encounter Archives. The Cartagena Timber Consortium dispatched me to Sector 7 to look into Rafael Mendoza's vanishing. The official telegram blamed a workplace accident, likely drowning, and noted a daily production loss of 3,000 board feet. Over 4 years, I had handled 19 logging cases in both Colombia and Venezuela, covering labor disputes, broken machinery, and the rare true catastrophe. Esteban Cruz and the camp foreman greeted me at the river dock. His opening words were, "Inspector Vargas, I need you to know something before you waste your energy. Mendoza didn't drown." I was familiar with that sort of talk, men hiding their carelessness behind superstition. But I was mistaken. Cruz first directed me to Mendoza's tent. It was routine protocol, so I examined the space, searching his belongings for any hint of flight or wrongdoing. The tent was spotless. Bedroll neatly rolled, personal possessions laid out as if in a military barracks. An envelope containing his weekly earnings of 43 pesos was addressed to his mother in Midi. I pointed out that Mendoza sent money to his family every month, and the company records showed no gambling debts. Why do you believe this wasn't an accident? Before he responded, Cruz took a flask from his coat and had a long swallow. He answered because 3 witnesses had seen whatever took Mendoza, and because his footprints stopped being human long before they disappeared. I recorded those words exactly as spoken. In my experience, when workers began talking in riddles, they were usually piecing together a shared alibi. "I want to interview those 3 witnesses individually," I insisted. Company rules are meant to stop testimonies from influencing one another. "Inspector, they haven't exchanged a word since the incident, and they won't even make eye contact across the mess tent. Every one of them believes he's losing his mind." That made me pay close attention. First up was Manuel Ortega, who served as lookout. His responsibility was to spot falling logs and shout warnings. "Describe what you witnessed on the evening of October 9th, I asked. Ortega was 22, his hands calm, but his eyes empty. I was on the platform 30 feet above, with a clear view of the entire sector. Mendoza was probably working the saber, that massive tree near the curve of the creek. It was 5:30 inches the evening, with roughly 2 hours of daylight remaining. Then a woman emerged from the trees. I stayed quiet and allowed him to continue. She was stunning. Inspector, long dark hair, a pale gown. She called out to Mendoza. I couldn't make out what she said, but he lifted his head and smiled. Then he set down his axe and started walking toward her. He asked if I had shouted after him, and I tried, but my throat closed up and my voice wouldn't come. I could only watch as he followed her into the trees, moving like someone still lost in a dream. "How long before you came down from the tower?" "About 2 minutes. At last my voice returned, and I called out for Cruz. We went into the jungle after him and picked up his tracks right away. Since the earth remained soft from the prior day's rain, we followed them for roughly 30 yards. Ortega stopped and took 3 slow breaths. The footprints ahead no longer were Mendoza's clean, deep, and unremarkable. They had turned into animal tracks, single hoof prints, like those of a horse, but somehow off. The gap between them was too long, and only one leg seemed to have made them. I had been an inspector long enough to spot true distress. Ortega believed every word he uttered. But believing something and having it be true are two different things. The next witness was Tomas Delgado, a sawyer who had spent 8 years with the consortium. Delgado said he was cleaning the crosscut when Mendoza walked past him, heading for the forest. He called out and asked whether Mendoza was going to answer nature's call. Mendoza offered no reply and didn't even turn his head. What time was that? Just before 6. He knew because the dinner bell rang and he checked his watch. He was due back at any moment. Tell me about his manner. He moved the way a husband does when he is following his wife to the bedroom. If you understand what I'm saying, Inspector, his gaze was intense and hungry, yet his eyes were strange, hazy, as if he'd had too much to drink. But I had seen him an hour earlier, and he was completely sober. Was anyone accompanying him? Delgado nodded slowly. A woman walked ahead of him, gliding through the thicket without a whisper of sound, not even nudging the ferns aside. I only saw her from behind. Yet her hair was remarkably long and dark. She wore a dress that seemed costly white cotton, maybe linen completely out of place in the jungle. Did you follow them? I went perhaps 20 paces into the trees, and that was when I heard her laugh. Inspector, that laugh was not human. It sounded like wind moving through a cave, and it made my teeth ache. I turned and raced back to camp. I made him go over his description of the woman 3 times. The details never shifted. That troubled me more than any talk of the supernatural. A story that never changes either comes from careful practice or from true observation. The third witness was Esteban Cruz himself. I told him, I need your account separate from the others. Don't draw on what you've been told, only on what you witnessed yourself. Cruz took out a tobacco pouch and rolled a cigarette with practiced ease. Ortega came down from the tower shouting, saying Mendoza had gone into the jungle after a woman. I grabbed 2 other men, and we went in and found Mendoza's tracks quickly. His boots leave a particular imprint, because the left heel is worn on the outside edge, and I could confirm that was the same. I made a note to look at Mendoza's spare boots. We followed his trail, maybe 40 yards. The prints were plain in the mud, normal in depth, normal in spacing. Then they began to shift. How did it change? The right boot print simply vanished without a trace. The left boot print persisted for perhaps 6 additional steps, yet it grew progressively fainter, as if its maker were shedding weight with each stride. And then it too disappeared. In its place was a single deep cloven hoof print. The strides stretched from a normal span of roughly 30 inches to nearly 6 feet between impressions. That defies physical possibility. Inspector, I know what is possible after 15 years working in logging camps. I understand the limits of possibility, but I'm insisting on what I witnessed firsthand. Ortega witnessed it, and Delgado corroborated the sighting of the woman. However, there is more. From a leather pouch, Cruz produced an item and set it down a torn piece of white cotton, stained with blood, and an additional dark, thick resin carrying the odor of decaying plant matter. I found this caught on a vine some 50 yards beyond the point where the tracks altered. He then presented a second object, a human molar, root intact. Cruz said softly, "The tooth matches Mendoza's dental records. I verified against the company's medical file. That very molar had been filled with silver amalgam 2 years earlier and the filling is clearly visible. Using tweezers, I lifted the tooth. The amalgam filling was plain to see, and fresh damage to the root indicated it had been forcibly pulled out. My professional doubt began to fracture. On the morning of October 12th, I personally inspected the site of the physical evidence. Crews assigned 4 rifle-armed men to join me, citing company protocol for jungle operations. Yet I observed that none of them would gaze directly at the surrounding trees. The point of track transformation matched the description precisely. I captured it from 6 different angles, measured the gaps, and assessed soil compaction using a graduated probe. The boot impressions were uniform in depth, about 1.4 inches, consistent with a man of Mendoza's documented weight of 163 pounds. They were pristine, no scuff marks, no signs of struggle, and no peculiarity in stride. Then, exactly as Cruz had claimed, the right boot print abruptly ended. The left boot print carried on for 6 more marks, each one shallower than the one before. The 6th indentation was only 3/4 of an inch deep. Following that, the hoof prints commenced individual cloven marks, 4.7 inches wide and 2.1 inches deep. With the stride length measured, it measured between 71 and 78 inches. I ran the calculations twice. To produce such stride length and such depth, the creature would require a weight of roughly 400 pounds and legs at least 5 feet long. No known animal could achieve that biomechanics while moving through dense jungle in that pattern. "Inspector," one of the workers urged, "we should turn back now. But I must trace this to the final point." There is no final point. The tracks extend for 3 miles. We pursued them on the day Mendoza vanished. They led to Agua Clara Creek, entered the water, and never emerged on the opposite bank. You scanned both river banks, a full 2 miles in every direction. Not a single trace. I snapped a photo of the final track and took the creek's measure. 4 feet in depth, a gentle current, and a bed of smooth stones. In this climate, the gases of decay need 72 hours to lift a corpse, and 3 days had already passed, yet nothing had surfaced. I headed back to Cartagena and devoted 2 days to the consortium's archives. Their records stretched all the way back to 1871, covering 33 years of logging across 6 regions. I searched for patterns and found them. Sector 7 had been in operation for 11 years, and during that span, 7 workers had vanished under. Officially, these cases were ruled accidental deaths. No bodies were ever found. I went through every single record. Back in March 1894, Vicente Ruiz was seen for the last time walking into the forest as night fell. His tracks were located, yet his body never turned up. Then, in July 1896, Alejandro Torres vanished. According to witnesses, he had followed a woman dressed in white into the jungle. His footprints were discovered, but his remains were not. In October 1898, Miguel Santos was last observed close to Creek Bend, where his boot prints abruptly stopped at the water's edge. Again, no body was found. Ernesto Vega vanished in January 1900. Several witnesses saw him moving into the forest as though under a spell. His tracks were located, but his body was not. The pattern was exact. Every disappearance took place between twilight and complete darkness, and every victim was a man between 20 and 35 years old. In every case, they appeared to be answering some call, an unseen presence pulling them toward the trees. I checked the regional census data and the Catholic parish registers to find connections, but the story went back further. The Cofan, the area's indigenous people, had lived on this land until 1867, when the government forced them to relocate. Their oral traditions, documented by a Jesuit missionary in 1863, spoke again and again of a woman with a single leg who hunted men. Father Domingo Castillo, the missionary, had written down the legend with striking precision. The local people warn against setting foot in the forest alone after sunset. They tell of La Patasola, a vengeful phantom who takes the form of a beautiful woman, drawing unfaithful men to their doom. Once the victim is alone, she is believed to reveal her true appearance, a one-legged beast with fangs and claws that tears at human flesh. To satisfy her appetite, the Cofan left monthly offerings at the boundary stones. As for the boundary stones, I obtained a surveyor's map of Sector 7. The logging had grown little by little across 11 years, with each new advance cutting deeper into the woods. Within 6 months of every expansion, someone vanished. The consortium had been disregarding the indigenous territory markers in a deliberate, systematic way. That evening, October 14th, I came face to face with Cruz. "You knew," I told him. "The company knew too. 7 men in 11 years, that's not happenstance. That's a design." The workers refused to look at me. "The consortium pays good money, Inspector. Men have to earn a living. The jungle is a hazardous place. Mishaps happen." Those were no mishaps. They were sacrifices. You deliberately advanced into land you knew was off limits. You dismissed the warnings of those savages who revere the trees and rivers. Inspector, we're in 1904. We've got railways, telegraphs, and electric lighting. We refuse to base our business choices on superstition, then account for the tracks and the pattern, and why every disappearance follows the exact same approach. Cruz poured a generous 3 fingers of rum. "You ask for an explanation? Here it is. People perceive what they already expect. These men are overworked, isolated, and drinking heavily, sharing tales with one another. When one man stumbles away, drunk, and drowns, the next hears the story, and his mind supplies the specific. Seeing patterns in randomness is simply human nature. As for the physical clues, the tooth and the cloth, Mendoza brawled, lost a tooth, then fled into the jungle in shame. In a few months, when the dry season lowers the water, we'll discover his remains in some ravine." I placed the photos on the table, showing the sequence of the trail's transformation. "Explain that." Cruz studied them for a long while. He finally admitted he couldn't. But he also couldn't report to the consortium that we lost a worker to a mythical creature. They'd close the entire operation. 300 jobs lost. Families would go hungry for what? For footprints in the mud. Just then, we heard it. A woman's voice singing. The song was stunning. A classic Colombian love ballad I knew from my youth. The voice emerged from the trees. Everyone in camp stood motionless. "Don't move," Cruz murmured. "Don't answer. Let it go by." Yet Manuel Ortega was already on his feet, his gaze blank and unfocused. He began walking toward the forest edge. I pulled out my revolver and shot twice skyward. The singing ceased. Ortega dropped to the ground, with 3 men restraining him. He fought wildly, struggling to escape, shouting, "Let me go to her! Let me go!" I sprinted to the forest boundary and lifted my lantern. She stood 30 feet among the trees. Nothing the missionaries told me had readied me for this. She was breathtaking, unbelievably so. Her long dark hair swayed as if in a breeze that wasn't there, and her skin resembled porcelain. A white gown wrapped her, seeming to radiate light in the dark. Her features were flawless, with sharp cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that caught the lantern light like an animal's. She smiled, and her mouth just kept opening, wider and wider. Her jaw came undone like a serpent's. Innumerable needle-like teeth, arranged in circular rows, glistened with moisture in the lantern glow. Then she turned around. The white gown protected only the front. Her back lay bare and skeletal. Her spine showed through translucent skin. In place of her right leg sat nothing more than a smooth, scarred stump. With that unbelievable hopping motion, she vanished into the darkness, each bound carrying her 15 feet into the jungle. I stood there trembling, my revolver feeling. It made no sense at all. Behind me, Ortega was crying. She was stunning. She wanted me. "Why did you stop me?" Then Cruz appeared at my side. He spoke in a low voice. "Now you see why we keep silent. Who would ever believe any of this?" I possessed photographs, witness accounts, real footprints, a tooth, old records, and I had just laid eyes on her myself. In the main tent, we gathered a council. Cruz, me, and 5 longtime workers who had survived earlier meetings with her. Her hunts occur every couple of months, I noted. The pattern is clear, 6 months apart. But Mendoza disappeared just 3 days ago, so we likely have around 5 months before her next hunt, Cruz warned. If we push on with the expansion, she'll strike earlier. She's protecting her territory, and we are trespassing. That's how predators behave. Then Tomas Delgado raised his voice. His grandfather, he said, had been Cofan, and long before their displacement, had told him tales of La Patasola. She had once been human, an actual woman. She betrayed her husband. When he found out, he severed her leg and abandoned her in the woods to die. But something ancient within that jungle preserved her, transformed her, granting her immortality and an endless hunger. Now she exacts vengeance on men, particularly those who cross the sacred limits. That's just folklore, I replied on reflex, but immediately paused. Yet every legend has a kernel of truth. Delgado went on. The Cofan offered her tributes, performing rituals every month at. It was those boundary stones that kept her content and confined to her territory. Once the government forced my people out, the offerings ceased. She then changed her hunting approach, luring men toward her. Cruz produced a bottle, and we each took a drink. "So what do you suggest, Inspector?" he asked. I studied the map, tracing the expansion's limits and the recorded kill area. "We hunt her," I announced. "At dawn tomorrow, we take an armed group, follow her to wherever she hides during the day, and we finish this." "A spirit cannot be killed," Delgado insisted. "Anything that bleeds can die," I countered. I had seen her teeth. Teeth imply flesh. Flesh implies mortality. I wasn't fully convinced, but I wanted to be. The other option was to admit our powerlessness against a being that defied every rule of nature I had built my career on. At daybreak, we gathered 8 of us. Each was handed a rifle and 50 rounds. I brought along my revolver, a machete, and plenty of camera gear to record anything we discovered. The tracks from 3 nights ago remained clear. We trailed them south, following the creek bed for 2 miles. The vegetation thickened, feeling far more ancient. 90% of the sunlight was filtered out by the canopy. Delgado halted abruptly and whispered, "Boundary stone." There it was, partially buried in brush basalt, engraved with strange symbols. The coffin carvings were rough, yet exact. They showed a one-legged female shape, encircled by smaller humans in poses of pleading. "Now we're inside her true domain," Delgado said. "Not the fringes, but the very heart of it." The trail brought us to a 20-foot waterfall, where the hoofprints went straight into the cascade and vanished. I moved forward cautiously. The cascade wasn't too powerful. Hidden behind it, cut into the rock, was a cave entrance. "Stay close," I ordered, raising my weapon. We stepped through the falling water. The cave mouth stood 7 feet tall, broad enough for 3 men side by side. Its walls were packed with hundreds of pictographs, built up over generations. The oldest had faded into near invisibility, while the newest appeared only days old. Maybe less. Every one of them showed the identical image: captives dragged into shadow, consumed, their remains heaped as offerings. We descended at an easy slope for around 200 yards. The air turned chill and damp, and the stench became unbearable. The odor of decay mingled with an additional scent, sugary and sickening. Soon the tunnel widened into a cavern. This space was massive, roughly 60 feet wide, its roof lost in shadow. The walls weren't random bone piles. They were deliberately organized. The thigh bones made geometric shapes, skulls lined up in rows, ribs interlaced into complex grids. We weren't looking at a mere feeding spot. It was a holy place. At the room's center sat a nest built from taken garments, strands of human hair, and forest plants. The nest itself was elaborate and intentional. Mendoza lay near its border, at least the greater part of his remains. His chest area remained whole. His right arm was gone. The left leg was meatless below the knee. Yet his face showed no fear. It was locked in a look of bliss. I shot photos of every detail, took dimensions, and drew exact diagrams of the bone layouts. Inspector Cruz shouted from across the chamber, "Come look at this." He stood facing a wall where the bones shaped an unusual pattern. Carved into the thigh bones were Spanish words: Maria del Castillo, 1643, Venza Eterna, eternal vengeance. Beneath that, we found newer engravings, names and dates of the 7 laborers who'd vanished during the last 11 years. Everyone was etched with care, every date exact. This wasn't blind hunting. It was premeditated and intentional. She was documenting everything. "She has intelligence, complete awareness," I said. "This is killing with planning, deliberate, planned murder." Right then, laughter reached us. She descended from overhead. That one leg was monstrously strong, able to hurl her 20 feet in a single bound. She dropped into the middle of the room, blocking the way out. Under the glowing light, I saw her entire form. From the waist up, she remained lovely. Almost human, dark flowing hair, flawless complexion, but her eyes were off, pitch black, lacking any white, just like a shark's. At the waist, her body changed into bare vertebrae and internal organs. The solitary leg, oversized and matted with coarse hair, finished in the split hoof. And her mouth, my God, that mouth extended beyond belief. Inside, I noticed 3 circular rows of see-through teeth, each angled inward like a lamprey's. Her jaw came apart until the gap measured close to a foot wide. Then she let out a scream. That cry was far from human. It was multi-tracked, several voices singing together at pitches that caused pain deep in my ears and smeared my sight. "Fire!" Cruz yelled. In that cramped area, 8 guns fired all at once. The blast was overwhelming. I watched a minimum of 4 bullets strike her body. I saw each hit and dark, near black blood burst from the wounds. Still, she never slowed. She sprang toward the closest man, a young timber worker called Portillo. A single stroke of her arm slashed his throat open. Her movements were exact and efficient, with no gesture wasted. We kept pulling the triggers. Shot after shot. More shots landed. More blood poured out. She bore no fewer than 9 injuries. Any ordinary person would have already been dead or on the verge of death. She finished Portillo completely, taking his head. Then, using her teeth, she ripped an arm from its shoulder joint and turned toward Cruz. I unloaded every round from my revolver into her back. 6 bullets, all in the torso, 3 striking the spine. She staggered and collapsed onto her one remaining leg. She twisted her head to gaze at me. Her face remained lovely and calm, blood streaming from her lips, and then she smiled. In a hush, she uttered, "Hombres, crembres, Nanka, Brendan. Men are forever men, learning nothing." Then Cruz pressed the rifle barrel to her temple and fired. The corpse did not melt away, fade into nothing, or morph into vapor or darkness. It remained intact, tangible, lifeless. With trembling hands, I inspected it. Its tissue had dried into a partial mummified state, kept intact by whatever force had kept her alive for hundreds of years. Through the see-through skin over her lower belly, her inner organs could be seen. At the moment we shot her, they were still at work: heart, lungs, and a digestive system built to handle raw flesh. Her lone leg bore the marks of ancient injury. Where the right leg had once joined the hip, there was scar tissue, the kind that forms after a rough, primitive amputation. That wound was centuries old, but it had never healed. Arrested in that moment of violation, whatever she had been, woman, ghost, both, she had been mortal enough to be slain. Cruz sat slumped against the wall, his gaze fixed on empty space. At last he spoke. "We cannot report any of this. They'll halt all work in the area and open inquiries. All of us will be entangled in this. We destroyed something that had been slaughtering your employees," I responded. "That was self-defense, a way to safeguard the company's interests." "But we killed a woman, Inspector. Just look at her. That is the image the law will take in. A legless corpse we shot 15 times in a cave full of old bones. They'll say we murdered a woman and invented a ghost story." He was right, and I couldn't deny it. And what about Mendoza, Portillo, and the other 7? Logging accidents, drownings, animal attacks. The standard reports we've always submitted, and they're accepted because nobody wants to probe deeper. I cast my eyes over the walls, over that bone-covered altar, over all the proof of ages of brutality. "We set it on fire," Cruz declared. "Everything, bring the whole cave down. Bury it all. Grant Mendoza and Portillo dignified burials with sealed coffins. Shift the logging to Sector 4 and make sure nobody ever returns here." Pointing at the corpse, Cruz announced that she wouldn't be hunting again because they had ended it. That was what counted. I submitted my official report on the 23rd of October. 1904. According to the inquest, Rafael Mendoza drowned crossing Agua Clara Creek one evening, and his body was later recovered. The death was declared accidental, with no blame assigned to Cartagena Timber Consortium. Safety protocols for crossing Solo Creek were urged in the findings. A separate note explained that Vicente Portillo perished the same day in a different logging accident triggered by faulty equipment. So regular axe maintenance was recommended. Both families were handed generous death benefits, personally arranged by the crew. Then we set the cave ablaze, detonated 60 pounds of black powder to seal the entrance, and covered it beneath 10,000 tons of rock and jungle debris. We dug out and destroyed the boundary stones, losing the ancient pictographs forever. La Patasola's corpse burned for 14 hours. The bones initially refused to ignite until we soaked them in kerosene and oil. Once the burning was complete, we threw her ashes into the creek and watched the current carry them toward the ocean. I did, however, hold back one piece of evidence. The skull was washed, studied, and stored in a locked office drawer where no one will ever see it. Its dental features are completely singular. The jaw connection is physically impossible, and the bone density suggests an age of at least 300 years, possibly more. On certain nights, I bring the skull out and examine it, uncertain how to reconcile the elegance of the face I once saw with the horror beneath. Maria del Castillo, assuming that was her real name, had been gravely wronged in 1643. Outrage and dark forest sorcery turned her into a creature that stalked men for over 2.5 centuries. We didn't just slay a monster, we ended the final trace of a human who had transformed into something incapable of death, forgiveness, or restraint. Logging activities in Sector 7 resumed in 1906. Since then, no workers have vanished. I resigned from the firm in 1907 and established a private investigation agency in Medellin. Even now, I accept clients and compose reports. I steer clear of the jungle altogether these days. Whenever I encounter accounts of Lada, the one-legged woman who pursues unfaithful men, I refuse to dismiss them simply as myth. I know precisely what she was, and I'm aware of exactly how we destroyed her. Whether that was justice or homicide, I still cannot say.